Faith can feel like hearts and butterflies until someone lights a match and burns it all to the ground. Welcome to the Burning Butterflies podcast.
The sad thing is that there's abuse of every kind within the church, but the spiritual abuse is the stuff that just
It's a place there shouldn't be abuse. Like, there just shouldn't be abuse in a place that claims Jesus.
Well, it ruins your soul. If you're new here, we suggest listening to our Prologue episode first. This is the story of two women's journey through spiritual abuse and escaping from toxic church culture while finding hope in Christ.
Sometimes it's just the facts, and if you get offended by it, that's a you issue. And if we can't be mature enough to have these conversations, even if some of the topics are difficult, then shame on us. So welcome to Burning Butterflies. We're glad you're here.
Yeah.
I'm glad to be here. This has been a journey and a half. How about you?
Yeah. I feel like this has been such a long time coming. And I think there's been some fear for me of like, I want to do it right and I want to do it justice. And I don't want to come off as bitter or
from the wrong place.
Hateful. I want my heart to be coming from a place of like wanting to help people.
Mm-hmm.
And so, that's my...
Yeah, I find that interesting because I've really been in the same place, because we tried to record this once before and we listened to it. We're like, that's not what we want or where we're going. So it's interesting how in the last, because it's been about a month.
Yeah.
So in the last month, how much I've changed in some of my thinking and feelings, and just how much you can have your eyes opened even still. But what I realized is these processes take a lot of time. And if we really waited until like whatever that moment is that I'm like, okay, well, I'll be ready then, it will never happen.
Yeah.
And I think I landed in a really good place of, okay, this is where I'm coming from at this moment, and that it's okay to still have questions, but that I'm confident that I know my motives and my motivation, and regardless of how anybody takes that, I'm always going to be accused of something. So
yeah,
I know where I stand, and I'm confident that I can stand on those two legs and be confident in what we're doing. So
yeah, I agree.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, why do you want to do this podcast? What's your driving force?
That was a question that came up. What is your driving force? And I was like, oh, I have to like really think about that. For me, I really got to a place of anger, and not here I am, I'm going to try to justify this, but it's okay for me to say I'm angry. I'm angry about the system. I'm angry about how the system hurts people. And I'm angry that I was deceived by the system.
Yeah.
Not just in the last 10 years, but for my entire life.
Yeah.
And something that we will dive into is, how did we get here? How did we get here? How do we do better? And, when you don't have the information, you can't make fully aware decisions. And so I say a lot of times like I'm a protester and I'm this, but then I feel like I sit silently for so long and I'm done. That doesn't help anybody. It doesn't do any good. I've been so encouraged, and I've been able to grow and heal and come back to myself because other people had the courage to stand up and say something. And honestly, like, sometimes it's just the facts, and if you get offended by it, that's a you issue. And if we can't be mature enough to have these conversations, even if some of the topics are difficult, then shame on us. So that's really where I'm coming from, of like, there's just things that have to be said. There's things that need to be said. There's a when I think of certain people who've been hurt by the system, and outside of myself, not just me, it's like for that person. Because if that person can't speak for themselves, I can. And I
Yeah.
can speak for the majority of people who I'll speak for the people who've been hurt. I'll speak for the people who just silently leave and don't say anything. I'm not that's not how
Yeah.
I roll, and I'm done being silent. So that's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah.
What about you? What is your driving force?
Um, I want to give a voice and a language to people who know something is off, but they can't quite put their finger on it, or um, they're they're so desperate um, that they're blinded by their desperation, because that's where I was.
Mm-hmm.
And so um, I know along the way people tried to speak into me and tried to speak truth into me, and I didn't see it. And so I wonder if they came at me, instead of coming at me from a place of it's against this one person,
Yeah.
and instead came at me with the language and um, the voice of this is a systematic thing. This is a much bigger problem. Um, I want to speak against that systemic marginalization against women, especially women who don't work outside their home,
Mm-hmm.
because that is who I was. Um, and there is a huge, huge problem with that, of the abuse of those women within the church body as a whole. And I want to highlight that abuse,
Yeah.
that spiritual abuse that takes place behind closed doors, because um, the sad thing is that there's abuse of every kind within the church, um, but the spiritual abuse is the stuff that just
Well, it's a
will,
place there shouldn't be abuse. Like there just shouldn't be abuse in a place that claims Jesus.
well, and it just it ruins your soul, like
Yeah.
on just a whole nother level.
Mm-hmm.
And to do all of that in the name of God
Yeah.
is unacceptable. And
Absolutely.
so that's why I want to do this podcast, because I want to speak against those things.
Well, and you hit on such an interesting point about like, was there anything that anybody could have said at any time to convince you otherwise because you were so convinced in one direction? And I think of it a lot in terms of like, any addiction, people who are addicted to anything, it's when they get to that place that they're ready.
Mm-hmm.
And you can say a million times to them and they won't get it until they're ready to receive that. So I don't know if there was anything that anybody could have said to me that would have changed my mind. There were things people could have said that I would have hopefully made decisions that I made sooner. But when I was ready to hear, when I was ready to receive, when I was looking for those answers, I'm glad that there were
Yeah.
people at that time. And so even for this, I feel like sometimes it's not sometimes I want to do this, like you said, so that there's something that can help somebody, but can help them. I realize that that might be when they're ready.
Yeah.
Like they might not listen to this. They might listen to this and be like, have, and be totally against or offended by what I say.
Yeah.
But when they have an experience that leads them to walk out the door, this might be the thing that they need to help them see and understand what they just went through and help them process it.
Well, and I think of all of the things that we've listened to, all of the stories that people have had the courage to share their story, and it's affected us so profoundly.
Yeah.
Um, and I think for me, the thing I came to realize is that there's these stories, and it's, well, like one of the biggest examples is Hillsong. So there's a documentary out there called The Secrets of Hillsong, and I watched that, and I think about when all of that stuff came out, the Carl Lentz and all of that kind of stuff came to light. I was in the trenches. I was like fully, in my um my high demand church, and it was dismissed away. Well, this is why you don't have mega churches.
Mm-hmm.
And so I want to be that voice. I want to share my story, because this is not a mega church problem. This is not a giant Christian organization problem. This is a systemic problem across the board, specifically in America. And yes, it goes outside of American borders, but a lot of the stuff that goes on in these other countries, I mean, like Hillsong is an
In Australia, yeah.
Australian church, but that all they all got what they how they set up their church. They got that from coming to America and looking at the American church.
Right.
And so, some of the documentaries and podcasts that we've looked at is, like I said, like The Secrets of Hillsong, Shiny Happy People, which is the one about the Duggars. Lula Rich was what kind of like started.
Which is so funny to me that it's like a
thing.
documentary on a leggings company,
Yeah,
and it was
an
a
MLM.
pivotal moment of like.
Then we watched American Playboy, which is like about Hugh Hefner.
Oh, I didn't see that one.
Brandy and I watched that one together, and it was very.
I'm going to watch that.
It was kind of creepy how a pornographic magazine, the control that and the abuse that happened was so similar. I watched a documentary called Active Shooter, and it talks about like huge like mass shootings in America, and kind of like the thought process behind the people who did that. And some of it was like religious factors. And then God forbid, the sex scandal.
You've been busy. I haven't even watched. I'm like, there's more.
Those are the documentaries I watch. But then we listen to podcasts. We listen to The Rise and Fall of Mars Hill, which was
a big
one. That was a huge one. That was a huge one for us to not feel like we're crazy or we're alone. Untangled Faith. Amy Fritz does an amazing job. She shares her story of the Dave Ramsey solutions. Truce podcast. He dissects a whole bunch of stuff, but he really dissects like Christianity in America. And then one of my favorites, it's a guy I started following on TikTok, and then I found his podcast, Data Over Dogma. And what he does, his name is Dan McClellan, and what he does is he takes things that are considered biblical truth, and he like goes into actually like the historical data that like archaeologists and scholars and people far smarter than any of us have done their research and devoted their lives to digging into, and really looking at how much of our belief system is based out of dogma. It's just based off of something that, well, I believe this just because this is what I believe. And there's no data, there's no facts to back that up.
Right.
And we take what the Bible says and we just make it say whatever we want it to say.
Right. Well, and that's something that like coming into this, we have, I mean, between documentaries, podcasts, reading, research, rabbit holes, just time consumed into understanding and breaking down, because we deconstructed in another podcast. We accidentally started a podcast and we were going through life. This all happened. We deconstructed, and we realized that now, being so far out of the situation, so far removed, that we need to go back now that we have all of this understanding, because you and I are the type of people where it's not just good enough to be like, oh, that's the answer. No, I'm going to go read 20 books on that, or listen to 17 podcasts, or do the research and see what people are saying, and just pick at it. That we look at this and we go, okay, we have to really go back. We realize this is a problem that is so beyond what we experienced, but that our story and our timeline flows into it as, for me now, like being a product of this 200-year-old country of America. I'm 46 years into America,
Mhm. Yeah.
So I've been Americanized my whole entire life. I've been churched my whole entire life, and those two systems have their origin story, which up until recently I had absolutely no idea. And I was listening to the Truce podcast, and I realized, as he was describing all the different shifts that we've had, and he's like, well, you realize that we did this because of this. This was an answer to this. We zigged over here, we zagged over there, we zigged back over here. And I realized that, okay, I'm a fundamentalist if you want to talk to me about this conversation. I'm an Arminianist if you want to talk to me about this conversation. I'm a Calvinist if you want to talk to me about this conversation. I'm I'm politically this if you want to talk to me about this conversation. And then
Yep.
I'm like, what does any of this have to do with, like, I thought I was like, right before we decided to do this, but I thought I was good. I'm like, oh, I've deconstructed. I know what I believe. I'm back. I'm good. And now I'm like, I got a whole nother, you know, journey to go
Yeah.
through, because I'm like, do we even know why we believe what we believe and why we do the things we do and
Exactly.
where it came from, and like things that I believed were like ancient Hebrew, Jesus was walking on the earth time. That's why we do these things in church. Turn out to be like 170 years old
Yeah.
from
Exactly.
some guy who was mad at some other guy down the street. And he was like, well, you're doing it wrong, so we're going to do it this way.
Yep.
And I'm right back to the stupid hymnal argument that used to drive me crazy as a kid.
Yep.
Like, I mind blown and a little flabbergasted by it all.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I think it's good, and I think it's good to understand that where we're coming from is such a big issue, like even to the fundamental root of what you think about religion. It's just a religion issue is really,
Yeah.
I mean, just man-made religion is really what it comes down to. Um, but we're really going to dive into like high control would be the politically
Hmm.
correct high control. Uh, I like to joke. I'm tongue in cheek. It's a cult. I'm sorry,
Yep.
but
Well, so let's define some words,
okay, we'll define that. That sounds
because
good.
so we joke about we were in a cult. It's very jokey. You're gonna hear us say things like we were in a cult, we drank the Kool-Aid, we shared the Kool-Aid, all of those things. We understand that um, under the legal definition of a cult, we were not in a cult. But if you look at um, the characteristics that make up a cult, um,
Well,
there's argument that
well, hold on a second, because as far as like a cult that participates in illicit illegal activity, no, we were not in a cult. But as far as the characteristics that make up a cult, we were in a cult.
yeah,
However, politically correct, that is a high control
yeah, a
religious
yes,
organization. You can have high control families, high control relationships, high control organizations, institutions, you name it, you can be in a high control environment, and all of these characteristics will apply.
yeah,
When it becomes a problem is, I think, when it has to do with your relationship with God.
yeah,
I think it's all toxic. And just because there wasn't illicit, illegal activity, um, but we are going to use the term politically correctly.
yeah,
But I will also say I was in a cult, because I don't really
yeah,
have, for a long time, I felt like, should I say that? Of all the research I've done, yeah,
yeah,
that's what I should say. But yes, it's a high control religion organization,
yeah.
not
Um,
illegal. Because people, and this is, oh, so anyway, this is what I was thinking. Like, when you say the word cult, I think this is where we were at for a while. When you say the word cult, your mind goes to, I was held against my will,
yeah,
isolated in a desert. Like, I mean,
Waco, Jimmy Jones,
you go to the
Hale
extreme,
Bopp Comet.
and I
That's what you
feel like
think.
that's the problem.
Yeah,
Is that we think that a cult is so extreme. But I'm going to tell you right now, if a cult was extreme, nobody joins a cult.
yeah,
Nobody is like, hey, I was hanging out on Tuesday night with these people and they invited me to their cult. And I went, and their cult meeting was so cool that I decided to join the cult. Nobody does that. If cults operated in a way that was that, flamboyant out there, nobody would. That's the point. The
Yeah.
point is that they are conspicuous. The point is that nobody really knows what the characteristics of a cult are because we think it's just those wacky, illegal, illicitly illegal. Like I didn't join. I wouldn't join that.
Yeah.
No. But then you get yourself into things, and then the next thing you know, you're like, okay, this is not okay.
Yeah.
So I don't know. That's just my 2 cents on that.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about the evangelical church across the board because that is what we're talking about. Is this non-denominational? A lot of them are born out of the Baptist movement, mega church modeled. Um, let's just
Yeah.
let's just say what it is. It's a white male dominated um, evangelical movement.
Right.
And I like how Chris puts it in the Truce podcast.
Mm-hmm.
He said he defines some things that evangelicals they believe the Bible is complete and total truth. Everything is it has to be backed by the Bible. They believe wholeheartedly in sharing the gospel. We have got to save everyone. There's an emphasis on church above all else because God's family is eternal. So your church family is above your family, it's above your job, it is above everything. And they want to stand out against the world. It's kind of a us versus them kind of thing. They are the chosen. And then I love what he says. He says a fundamentalist is basically an evangelical who's mad about something.
Right.
And what they're mad at changes every so often. But that is what we're fighting against. This is not a anti church, and we're definitely not like coming for the denominations. We're looking at this movement where it's kind of the wild west and there's really no rules. Every non-denominational church can kind of make up their own rules and make up their own um, playlist, and so that's what we're speaking out against.
Well, and the sign on the door doesn't even matter anymore when it comes
Exactly.
to church, and I think the definition for me, like the clarification there, is I'm not talking about the body of Christ. I say the word church absolutely in 100% way, not referring to the body of Christ, but referring to a
An organization, a
organization,
building,
a
a
a religious organization that exists, that people, recognize as, do you go to church?
yeah.
Like,
Yep.
no. But just that for me would be the definition there of clarifying that I'm in none of this is talking about the body of Christ, because every time I say that, people are like, "Oh, but the body of Christ," and I'm like, "I know that. That's something totally different."
Well, and that's, it's like that saying of like when women speak out against abuse and they say, well, men, and there's always someone in the comment section that comes out and says like, well, not all men. And so whenever you start talking about the church collectively as the church, you have someone who will come out and say, well, not all churches, not my church. Um, I'm going to be honest with you. I said that about my church and it was 100% my church. And so what we're asking is just to um, take our story and hold it up against what you're experiencing and just ask yourself, do I see parallels? Are their red flags the same as my red flags? And we're not asking you to, you know, leave your church or burn it to the ground or whatever.
Right.
Like we want to bring to light this stuff because how can we do better as Christians in America if we're not willing to have self-reflection?
Right. And sometimes you just have to look at it and just be like, okay, do I see that? Yeah. How do I not participate in it?
Yep.
None of that means that you have to go down any sort of road that you don't choose to go down. And then, and I think that that really leads us into like our storytelling process of the fact that like we are talking about a much bigger issue. We're going to tell our story along the way. I think for both of us, and I know Brandy too, we got to a place where it was recognizing and realizing that the common denominator is me. And so there's things that I have to deal with within myself. Um, and this is not a oh, it's all bad and I didn't have a participation in it at all. Like, I think we're fully aware of how we participated. We're fully aware of what led us into these
Yeah.
situations, fully aware of what made it okay for us to stay, because there's people who came into this organization and were like, this is not okay, and they left.
Yeah.
So why am I not the person who walked in and went, this is not okay, and leave? I'm the type of person who's like, this is great and awesome, and I am going to be all
And
in.
I'm going to stay for 20 years.
Right. So, okay, so recognizing that
Yeah.
there's just obviously things about each of us that led us to participate in the way we did. And then also, now that we're so many years out, being like, okay, wow, I have a whole different perspective on who I am. I can now look back and be like, this is what was wrong with that.
Yeah.
This is why I was there. This is why I participated. And I'm not going to make excuses for it, but I'm going to share it in a way to be like, hey, like, this is not okay. And now this is how I've been able to get to this place of healing and forgiveness,
Yeah.
and understand that that's a journey too.
Yep.
And honestly, some people get out of these environments. Like, I've been doing so much cult research in the last 6 months, it's not even funny. But understanding that sometimes people take lifetimes to undo
Yes.
the mental mess
Mm-hmm.
that was like, it breaks some people.
Mm-hmm.
And and so praise God that a couple years out that I'm where I'm at, but I also understand, because every day something, like I said, in the last month since we tried to record this before, I was like, okay, well, that kind of broke me. So I gotta like
Yeah.
go down and figure out why this is not sitting well with me. But it's a whole different way of doing life. It's a whole different
Yeah.
way of mind management, being an advocate for mental health, being an advocate for the things that lead people into um, what makes you. The biggest thing for me has been like this victim mindset, as far as it's like, being a victim is not your fault.
Yep.
Like, even the definition of victim is something that happens to you, not of your control, essentially,
Yeah.
through somebody's misappropriation or an accident or some event that happens. And so sometimes we are victims, but we're so scared of being victims that we don't even identify that, okay, I was a victim to this, but this has ended. And now there's something else. So I don't have to stay in that victim mentality. But there's so much victim shaming, and there's so much stuff that goes on that we almost don't even want to help ourselves, because we're like, well, then I have to admit that I was a
Yeah.
victim of this. But what made me an easy target, in a sense? What made me a target?
Yeah.
What made me, because I understand that, like, there's definitely a way you walk down the street where people look at you and they're like, I'm gonna rob you. And there's also a way you walk down the street where people are like, I'm not touching that. I mean, you've done it. You've walked
Yeah.
down the street and seen something, you're like, I'm not talking to that person.
Yeah.
They will annihilate me. So there's something, I don't even know if that's an accurate metaphor
No.
analogy, but that's where my mind went, is I'm
No,
like,
no, I think it is.
there
And
were
like,
definitely things about me that made me
yeah.
susceptible to being a victim. There
And
we go.
that's our process is so we're going to tell our story. So event like pretty much what we've done is we've timelined our entire time at this church. This timeline is going to span 20 plus years. And through that, I mean, we're gonna start in the year 2000 and we're gonna keep going, but we're gonna stop and we're gonna have those conversations. What made us a target? What made me fully participate? Because yes, I feel like I was a victim of this, but I also perpetuated abuse against others. I was an active participant, and what made me do that? why did I feel like that was okay? So we're gonna do that because basically we're living we're both like reliving our split timelines. There's the point where, because like you said, we're removed from this. We're 3+ years removed from this. And so we can look at this and we can say like, okay, there was a point in time where we felt like it was good. And it was us and our church family, and we were, living our best life, fighting against this big evil world, and we're trying to be righteous and godly and wonderful. And can you believe we get to do this? And all of the stuff we said. And so we're going to talk about that, but then also we see things eyes wide open for what they are now. So we will stop and we will have a conversation of how it, in the moment, it felt like it was wonderful and it was utopia. But in reality, it was sit down, shut up. Who do you think you are? Where's your faith? Why are you acting this way? And it was soul crushing.
Yeah. And also understanding that we're going to come at this from a perspective of like, we've done the legwork. There's still more to do. We're not experts in any of it, but we've researched the history of America and the church. Like
We've
we've
done,
researched the history of the church all the way back to Jesus.
we've,
And mental health
yep,
and all of it. And so you're going to get all of it in this
yeah,
podcast. That's what's
we've,
going to be so great
yeah,
about it.
we're striving really hard to come from a place of healing.
Yeah.
We've gone through therapy. We're still actively in therapy. Um, because the stuff we're going to talk about had the potential to wreck us.
Mm-hmm.
When we say we are survivors of the evangelical movement, we don't say that lightly. We don't say that flippantly. We
Right.
say that because it almost killed both of us.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to share those stories. So through all of this, if you're listening and you think, oh, I'm going to get some really juicy gossip, we're going to be honest, but we feel like the storytelling process, there's so much more justice done when you are not putting the evil and the sin on a person, but you're looking at it for what it is.
Right. And
That
the
because
problem really is faceless because it could
yes,
be anybody at any
exactly,
time. It was you, it was me. So really it could be any of us,
exactly.
could fall
And
into
so
this. So
we've changed names because
yeah, it doesn't do us
that,
any good.
well, like I shared at the beginning of this episode, is we had the Hillsong story, and they were, well, that's them, that's the mega church, that's, so we've changed names, we've made them into character names, because we don't want you to focus on the person. We don't want you to focus on the fact that this was a real person. We want you to listen to our story and hear the problem behind it. If you want some explanation as to why we picked the names that we picked, we do share that on our Patreon, and so we encourage you to be, this is a listener supported podcast, and so we encourage you to join our Patreon. We're going to give some more exclusive things like that over there. We're still not going to just come out and say what church we're talking about and say real names and things like that, because when it comes down there, yes, there's accountability. And yes, those people have and will continue to face accountability for what they've done. But unless you are a person standing in front of me, asking me a blatant question face to face, I don't feel like this is the platform to
Because it doesn't
to,
matter.
to share those things. That's not the purpose of
It's
what
not
we're
the
doing.
purpose.
We're
It
not
doesn't matter
here.
what the person's name is. The
Yeah,
actions of the things that they did and the belief systems that they were operating under, those are the problem.
yeah.
So
And so I, because in sharing what we're doing with this podcast with others, that is one thing that has been asked of me several times, is, well, where does accountability come in there if you're changing names? Accountability comes locally. Accountability comes face to face. And at the end of the day, I've been deposed. I am on legal public record, holding people accountable for their actions. And so accountability has happened. It continues to happen. And so if that's your concern with us changing names, then just know that there is no concern.
Right. And something else that I think is funny, I feel like even listening to like the Mars Hill podcast, and I don't know because I didn't listen to the Hillsong or watch the Hillsong one, but I feel like there's people that I know who experienced things with like bigger organizations or mega churches or mega church organizations, para-type organizations, and they are no longer, like there's a couple of people I've seen on TikTok that have said things about like Hillsong, but they don't live in Australia. And they're like in a whole nother country or so I feel like there's like this, and even like Mars Hill doesn't even exist anymore.
Yeah.
And even the founders and all that live in all different states and stuff. So, but for us living in the community, continued, we didn't move away. We're very local. We're very close. We are in environments with with people that we were in church. And I'm not trying to like watch what I say necessarily, but there is a level of, not on my end. It's funny when I run into people because they're like, "Oh, we still consider you family." Like they have to tell me that. Like I'm all
well,
okay.
Because I think that's important to point out. We are in a small community.
Yeah.
We're talking about a church that like, yes, they like to say like we're 500 plus members. Let's just be honest. Even in their heyday, 200 people in the building, including kids, at any given time. Like
Right.
That's just where we were at with it.
I was generous. I'd be like 350. That was my number.
So
you're like, yeah.
It was my job to count.
I know you counted. I'm like,
yeah. Well, we'll get into all of that, but like this is a very small church. We're in a very small community. We had to heal from this because when we walk out,
at the same grocery
we
store.
shop at the same grocery store. Anytime I walk out my door, to leave my neighborhood, I have to drive past this church.
Yeah.
Just to leave my neighborhood.
Yeah.
I have to be in a place that's healed.
Because you can't
otherwise I'm either going to be a hateful, bitter shell of a woman, or I'm just going to completely collapse upon myself and never leave my house.
Right. And it's been a process, and the process will continue, but the only way through it is through it. And some of that was forced upon us because what choice do we have? We could make those choices, but uprooting our entire lives and moving, which is an option.
Like we would have had to move out of our community.
Brandy did that. She moved to another state, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. I'm not saying like that you can't do that, but that's not an option for everybody. You have homes, you have kids and community and schools and lives that you've built around these places. And these things happen from small town middle America to ginormous overseas.
Well, and when you look at, like, I think it's something like over 90% of churches in America have less than 100 members.
Yeah. The option, you're probably going to experience this in a smaller church.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's what our podcast is about. We encourage you to consider joining us as a Patreon supporter. We will have exclusive bonus content over there, and like and subscribe because we don't want you to miss a single episode.
Burning Butterflies is a listener-supported podcast. Today's episode was brought to you by our amazing supporters on Patreon.
Follow the link in our show notes to learn how you can become a Patreon supporter too. Supporters get exclusive access to bonus content each month, including outtakes, cut content, and supporter-only episodes. If you've enjoyed this episode, please leave us a rating on your listening platform.
Burning Butterflies is a production of Asha Media. Thank you for listening.